5 ways to stay poor.
Okay, so Brian, I am excited about this one, but it sounds a little bit different. We're actually going to be talking today about how you stay poor. That's a different sort of vibe than we normally go for.
Well, look, we cover tons of great information
Sure.
on how to get motivated, how to spot opportunities, how to be optimistic for the future. But here's what I realized, Bo. We're but a whisper amongst a chorus of really bad information
Sure.
that's floating around out there. So, and look, this is everywhere. My wife and I, because, we're busting at the seams, ready to get out there and start trying to build memories again.
Oh, like go travel
yeah,
and do
because
all
I mean,
the
so
things.
we've been doing a lot of research all through the pandemic. We've been doing tons of research on traveling because if you can't travel, what's the next best thing? Research travel.
Sure.
And as we were looking at like rooms at like this Planet Hollywood resort, they had this quote that I remember from Ferris Bueller.
Okay.
And here's the quote: "Is life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it."
No, I don't dislike that quote. I don't
love it.
completely disagree with that quote at all, but I feel like sometimes maybe we take it to an extreme,
Well,
possibly.
this is realized. This is the quote 80s form. Now you fast forward a few decades where we are with the newer generation. Now it's YOLO. You only live. Now I
Is
know
YOLO
that's even
is
getting.
that- is that still a
that's
thing?
getting old too.
Oh,
But
wow.
follow me on the journey.
Yeah, okay,
as I
I'm with
think
you. I'm
YOLO's
tracking.
even
I'm
old
tracking.
too. But it's still you only live once, and that's kind of the chorus that you hear. It's things like that that are much louder than me sharing optimism. How you go grab and build off of opportunities
Sure.
so you can kind of become an empire builder. So we wanted to cover the 5 things that I see around us everywhere that are overwhelming our message.
Yep, so we're going to talk about if you want to stay poor, stay in that current lot, these are the things you should do. So let's jump into number 1.
Number 1, live for the moment. There'll be plenty of time in the future to catch up. I mean, there's even articles we've covered that say this exact same thing.
Well, I'll say even 2 things. Live in the moment. There will be plenty of time to catch up in the future. Or tomorrow's not guaranteed, so why would I even think about tomorrow? I'm just going to focus on today. If my paycheck comes in, I need to just spend that because it's what's in my I don't need to worry about tomorrow because I'm sure I'll be able to keep working. Sure, I'll be able to keep doing the things I'm doing.
And emergency funds, who needs that?
Who needs
I mean,
that?
we know that
Yep.
60% can't even come up with $1,000 because, look, I didn't have an emergency last year. What could go wrong
That's right.
this year?
Yep.
So number 2 is because number 1 wouldn't happen really without number 2, which is you got to spend more than you make. I mean, and the way you go do this is that you got to show your sex. I mean, we're going to edit that. You got to show your success. Holy cow. Okay, let's edit. Lord knows, Freudian. I don't know what that was. You gotta know your success. You gotta show your success. So you gotta flex a little bit. You gotta spend a little bit. That is what society feels like they push out there.
What I think is remarkable is we're not just saying live paycheck to paycheck. That's not even enough. If you really want to not improve your life, don't just live paycheck to paycheck. Live beyond your paycheck. Find a way that if you make $100, you find a way to go out and spend 110, 120, 130. Because if there are banks out there willing to just let you borrow money so that you can subsidize your current lifestyle, why in the world would you not go and do that?
Well, you can load up credit cards.
Yep.
You can afford anything, $200 at a time. I mean, life is so much easier if you just go with the flow, go with the easy financing. It's a bridge to nowhere, and I'll explain later what we mean by that. Number 3, don't trust the stock market.
Yeah, that thing is fixed. It's only for the wealthy people. It's only for the folks who are in the know. It's a big game, and if you are not on the inside, then you are on the outside. So just stay away from that stock market. And by the way, it's just like gambling. I mean, it's like going to Vegas and putting it all on a number on the roulette wheel or putting it on black and red. Stock market is certainly not a way to actually build wealth.
I've had comments where people have said 401ks are old-fashioned. So investing, I think traditional, what people consider traditional investing of the stock market investing, that's so 2018.
Yep.
Because now what everybody's doing is kind of the crowd stuff where, we're going to ride the wave with everybody else, or even better yet, we're going to ride it to the moon.
Yep.
To the moon.
To the moon.
I mean, so where could going to go wrong? Cryptos, Reddit boards, NFTs, we're all making money hand over fist. What could go wrong with these scenarios?
Why would I not only focus on some of that alternative stuff, some of that brand new age stuff? That stock market thing is for grandma and grandpa, not for me.
Number 4, and this ties into kind of what I was just talking about. Groupthink and crowdfunding, all these things are new modern things that are going on. And I think it's really driven. Social media has its fingerprints all over this. And the fact that why not get advice from everyone?
Yeah, don't think about the information you let into your mind. Just if somebody has an opinion, you should listen to it, and you should value it, and you should take the things that they say, no matter their personal circumstances or their credentials or their credibility. If someone tells you, hey, you should do this with your money, you probably ought to listen to them.
And the more failure, the better.
Oh,
Meaning
yeah,
that, like,
for
you know, it's no different than getting marriage advice from somebody who's probably on their 4th spouse.
Yep.
It's the same thing with money. If you have a friend or relative, somebody who's struggled to get out of the ditch, why shouldn't you take advice from them? We see this all the time. We even see it with commentators.
Absolutely.
That, you know, why wouldn't we want to go listen to their come from behind? And then number 5, this one, guys, it's so easy to just skip following the food. We talk about the financial order of operations. Yes, math works in a special way where if you do it, you know, you can't get the right answer unless you work through the seemingly logical system. Money doesn't have to work that way because, look, if you take FOO, financial order of operations, and just insert a little simple M right in between the 2 O's, you get FOMO, which is fear of missing out, and that's actually where society feels like. And I'm feeling so strong about this, guys. Y'all know it. We talk about it. I hold this thing, the crisp sheet of paper. Why listen to FOO? Why do FOO? I'll tell you what, guys. Just like this advice, all this stuff we just covered, all the chorus of these distractions that are in your ear. Ripping up the FOO is a disaster in your life. But I've listened to enough of you guys talk about, Brian, you have the FOO on such dinky paper that it's ridiculous that you can pop it around and do all that. So we did what all children of school teachers do.
We reached to the wrong side.
I went to the wrong side because that's where I had it pre-show. Get it from Daniel. We laminated it. Now, the FOO, there's nothing better than Bo Hansen behind a nice piece of plastic and giving it a glimmering sheen. We have taken FOO to the next level as now when I present this on air, you can't rip this because it is protected. I could even whiteboard erase this thing. This is an opportunity, and that's what I'm going to go ahead and switch, and we're going to pivot and tell you what are the tried and true ways you actually build wealth and start making sure you're getting your best financial life forward.
Yeah, maybe you are one of those folks who you actually don't want to be poor. Maybe you said, you know what, I've tried that in the past, and I would like to change my lot. If you just happen to fall into that small subset of the population that would like to not be poor, that would like to have some financial abundance, we want to give you a few tips on how to actually go about doing that.
The first thing, and when I go into high schools and I talk about the important concepts, this is the thing I always lead with because this is really the cornerstone of success. Deferred gratification is going to be your friend. And what I mean by that, guys, this is not hard. I just want you to take just a little bit. If you're young enough, just a little bit. I'm not saying go create memories, go have a good time with your life, but take a little bit through deferred gratification so you can have that great, big, beautiful tomorrow. We're not asking too much, and you can build a lot with a little, so get to work with understanding how deferred gratification is a superpower.
What I love is when we talk about deferred gratification, we're always talking about, like, okay, let's take a little bit of money, and instead of spending it, I'm going to defer to the future. But deferred gratification, if you really want to build wealth, it plays out in all kinds of different facets of life. If you're someone who's brand new to your career field, or you're just starting out in the workforce, it's okay to defer a little bit of gratification. Maybe you're not going to take off Fridays every week, and maybe you're not going to leave the office early, and maybe you're not going to do that. Maybe you do put in a little bit more time, a little bit extra effort, a little bit extra work, so that you can defer that gratification of maybe working 4 days a week, or maybe controlling your own schedule, or maybe whatever the thing is for you later on in life. The harder or the more you're willing to put in now to defer to the future, the better that future will be.
Well, I always think it's, look, here's an example. We didn't talk about this in pre-show, but it just kind of hit me. I remember when I first got out of college, well, this is probably 15 to 20 years out of college. And I ran into a college friend, and I found out that he had club-level seats at University of Georgia.
Right.
And I was like, my wife and I, this is back when we were season ticket holders too. I was like, I'm over there in the bad part of the stadium. I'm not, those aren't good seats. And I was like, how did you do it? And the only difference between us, his employer was doing a matching charitable contribution that he was using to get UGA tickets.
Okay.
And I thought, man, this is a great example of starting young, taking advantage of matching money, taking advantage of all the financial opportunities that are presented, whether it's Roth, whether it's 401ks, whether it's free employer money. Guys, the sooner you start that, one day you'll be sitting in club level of life, and your friends will be looking at you going, how did he end up there? I thought we were starting with the same amount of money. It's all through those incremental decision-making and doing it well. And that kind of leads to the next one, which is the trap that I see so many people fall into. Debt is actually a prison.
Yep.
So don't fall into that trap. You need to use debt. If you do make use of debt, which you will, make sure you have tremendous respect for it and even fear of what it can do to you if you don't handle it appropriately.
The third thing that we know to be true is that you ought to have a plan, because time moves fast. And frankly, when it comes to our financial lives, there are going to be things that we do not expect. There are going to be unknowns that take place. And the best way to defend yourself against that is to actually have a plan in place. Don't be someone that just lets life happen to you. Understand where you're trying to go. Begin with the end in mind, and have a plan that helps you walk through that.
And that's especially where the financial order of operations comes in. Now, I don't know if this has as good. I like that crisp paper sound, but this gives you the old wobble laminated sound here. But we know where every dollar is going to go if you'll just follow the financial order of operations. And what I like about this is it allows me to bring it full circle. In the beginning, I talked about that Ferris Bueller quote, which was life moves pretty fast. Hey, guys, that is also another way of saying time is out there. And that's one of the three components of wealth creation. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it. I would take Ferris's quote, turn it full circle, and say this is also your wake-up call to go, hey, take a little bit of today, have that great, big, beautiful tomorrow, because it's going to move fast.
Absolutely.
And you won't even miss the few $100s a month commitment you're making while you're in your 20s, or the $1,000 a month commitment you'll have in your 40s. You can do this, guys. You just got to wake up, realize I'm serious about this, make the commitment, turn it into a power habit, and you're going to be successful. And then here's the graduation, which is number 5. Know when you need a co-pilot. Look, we do the abundance cycle. You come here, we love on you, give you tons of free advice. There will come a time where complication will seek you out. No matter how much simplicity you desire, if you're successful, if you're wealthy, you will become complicated, and you're going to remember who planted the seeds. You're going to want to take the relationship to the next level, and that's why I love the abundance cycle and your desire to graduate to becoming clients and let us become your co-pilot with your financial decision making.
Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong. Look, sometimes you may have all the ability in the world to navigate your financial life, but because of other things, maybe family commitments or work commitments or community commitments allow you to put finances on the back burner. It's okay to get someone to come in and help. Or maybe just the gravity of your decisions is so great, you just want a second set of eyes. You just want someone to make sure that you are staying true. There's nothing wrong with that. The key is recognizing when you are at that point.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
No, I said, Siri, recognize when you are at that point. I think she got it this time.
You ever notice I've got the volume off, and still she decides she can talk to me while
Awesome.
people are delivering packages to my house. Keep going.
I think we ought to answer some questions, because one of the things that we like to do for you guys to help you continue to build wealth, help you continue on in the abundance cycle, is we want to make sure we're answering your questions. So if you have a question right now in the live chat, go ahead and get it out here, and we're going to go through this because we want to make sure we are equipping you to take your finances to the next level.
I'm surprised you trust me to answer questions after I had that huge mispronouncement.
I'm a little nervous.
And I was curious to see how did it all blow up in the comments.
Oh, it blew up all right.
Yeah, my bad, guys.
All right, let's...
Don't even know how to say. That's going to go in the blooper reel.
All right, let's. First question is from Chris, and this is one that we hear a lot, unfortunately, because people listen to voices that maybe they shouldn't. Chris says, I don't have a safe bucket. Now, I don't know if he's talking about conservative part of his portfolio, emergency reserves, he doesn't say. But I'm looking at a whole life policy that pays dividends, and in quotes, he put excess premiums. Boy, is excess right. Utilizing paid-up additions. Any thoughts on this as a safe bucket? Should I use whole life insurance as a safe bucket or a safe piece of my investment portfolio?
It's interesting because I read, there's this weekly column that comes out from a former financial journalist that I have a lot of respect for.
Sure.
Read a few of his books. And he actually, in this past Saturday's column, I'm not going to give his name, but he had a whole thing about whole life being an alternative for his cash. And I was kind of surprised to hear it because he's usually very fee conscious and concerned about things. And when and look, I'm not taking away that for certain specific cases, because I've even had permanent policies go for people in their very unique special situations. But to give advice to the masses that you know what you need to do for your safe cash is go into whole life, just seems to me like it is a permanent solution for a short-term problem. Right now, we know interest rates are super low. Cash is not paying anything. But I don't know if locking myself into a policy, which is by its sheer structure considered permanent, and the fee structure, all the costs, the commissions, and everything else that goes into whole life policy, plus the high elevated cost of insurance you pay in the beginning, I don't know that I think that is where I would go for a short-term problem unless I had a very specific set of needs that actually check the boxes. Just because cash and interest rates are low, I don't know if that's good enough for me.
You know, I have another problem with it. My opinion is that when it comes to your financial life, this is my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. I think that your investment should be investments, and I think that your insurance should be insurance. So if you're buying insurance, it's because you have a need to leave something behind to others in case you are not here. There's an insurable need for that. Well, if you're trying to satisfy that need, it seems to me that you would want the greatest benefit possible at the lowest cost possible. And from an insurance standpoint, most often that's term life insurance. That's kind of the best way to do that. From an investment standpoint, if you need a conservative sleeve of your portfolio, I would use conservative investments, whether that be a cash holding or fixed income or alternatives or whatever it is in your situation. I would let my investments be investments and I would let my insurance be insurance, because when you try to mix the two, you end up with either really expensive insurance or really ineffective, inefficient investments. You can just do a lot better. So why try to blend those worlds together?
You make a very solid point, is that really most of these policies, the way they can offer higher yields than markets typically is because they constrict your behavior for the first 5, 6, 7. We've even seen up to 10 years on certain policies. You know, and the fact that they're restricting your behavior in those periods, that's the liquidity period. What do we do? We put money into cash and those type of equivalent investments because that's money you think you might need for goals within 3 to 5 years, because anything over 5 years, we're thinking more long-term, we're thinking more investment structure. So are you really picking up something? It seems like the long way around the mountain to pick up a 3% yield when you can't get access to that money for if you needed it tomorrow anyway. That's the problem I always have with any of these permanent structures, is that yes, it looks great in the brochure to say this thing's going to pay you 3.5% when interest rates are at 0.5%. But then you think about, when would I actually have access to that 3.5%? I think you see that there's a lot more that you probably need to look under the hood, understand the fees, understand the structures. Yes, there's exceptions, but not something I'd put out there to the masses.
Love it. That was a great question. All right, here's the next one. This is from David, and this is one we actually get a lot, and I feel like it's a lot of press. So why would we not weigh into it? This is what David said. Is it worth it to pull out of my current home equity of $60,000? I've got $60,000 of home equity. Should I pull that out and invest all or some of it into the stock market? I'm 34. I took out a 15-year note, but I'm worried that I'm being too conservative. I feel like there's a lot of stuff in there that we can kind of speak to.
Yeah, I don't love that idea. Now look, Bo and I are in different places. For all the hoopla I get for being horrible with paying down the mortgage debt, I actually think our rule, by the way, just to reflect on what our rules are, I love the fact that people under 45 years of age should maximize compounding growth by, not get in a hurry to pay down your 2.5%, 3% mortgage, and let your money work in Roth IRAs, 401ks, and all those other great ways that you can build wealth. And basically, when you get confused, just follow the financial order of operations. Go to moneyguy.com/resources. You can download your free copy. But we do get a lot of people that get very excited about paying down debt pre-45, because I do think after 45, when you get to be my age, yeah, I mean, there's a balancing act between the risk, between the desire to be completely debt-free as you approach financial independence. I'm willing to have that argument discussion there, but under 45, it doesn't seem a very good use of money to pay down the debt. So I think somebody has heard us say that, and they say, well, if it's so good that we ought to do this, why not bring some leverage into this, and why don't we take debt off of our equity in our houses, especially when real estate's going up, and then go put that in the market? Here's why I don't love that. First of all, real estate transactions are very expensive.
Yep.
I mean, guys, if you don't realize, whenever even you do refinances or anything, go look at all the state stamps, all the peoples whose hands that are involved with title insurance, recording the deed. It gets kind of expensive.
Sure.
A lot of hands in the pots of getting access to equity, because real estate is a very illiquid asset, and that I don't like that cost. So that's the first X,
Sure.
essentially on why I would not do this. The other part is that there is something about a use asset, a shelter. Shelter is something that I think gives us peace of mind.
Sure.
I mean, we just had a horrible storm here in the Nashville area, where we had a lot of flooding. A lot of people around us are impacted by this. And I can remember as you're laying in bed with this storm, that you're like, how is it even possible to have this much water coming down over this period of time? I mean, you really do. You're amazed at Mother Nature doing it, but then you're thankful, like, thank goodness I have this house that is providing me shelter. I don't think taking more debt out on that is going to put you on a more secure path on that.
Yeah, what I don't love is that it's actually moving backwards. So you're on this 15-year note, and you have built up your equity to a certain point. But if you were to pull that equity out, you're basically going from your current risk posture to being even more aggressive on the side that I don't think you should be aggressive on. What I would argue in your situation, because you said you're 34 and you're on a 15-year note, here's what I would think about. One, I would look at my current portfolio and I would say, okay, well, how conservative am I being in my current portfolio? Because at age 34, odds are you could stand to be a little more aggressive farther out on the risk spectrum. Now, one thing that I would consider doing if I was specifically David is right now 15-year mortgages and 30-year mortgages are both super, 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 super low. So what I would look at is if I wanted to refinance, right, if I wanted to go from a 15-year to a 30-year, I would probably consider doing that before I would go pull that equity out of my home and put more of my use asset, my shelter, at risk. Well, then it's okay if you stretch it out over 30 years, you get your army of dollar bills working. It's sort of a best of both worlds approach. It is changing the calculus of your situation a little bit, but not so aggressive that you're actually taking money out of the thing that you live in.
Did he say what interest rate he had?
He did not. That's why I would.
Because that's what I mean. But there might be an opportunity with where interest rates are right now to go cheaper
on
in the 15-year with a 30-year.
Right.
There might be something to look into that, because that is the part. Look, I'm currently on a 15-year mortgage, but I'm also close to 50.
Yep.
I mean, and I did that. You still pick on me about that transaction, but I still believe under 45, I'm also okay with you doing a 30-year mortgage, because here's the point. When you're in your 30s, life is messy.
Absolutely.
You got kids in the house. You got, education goals, you got retirement goals, and you're trying to make sure you can get a house big enough to where you get at least some sanity space from all the messy middle that you're in the 30s, that I think that you'll appreciate what a 30-year mortgage can do for you. But understand, you are going to get aggressive with that debt later. So that's why you don't want to take leverage is something you need to be very fearful and scared of. So I don't love the idea of going out there and getting more, especially on your primary residence. It's giving you shelter through all the storms and all the other things that you're putting up with in life.
Love it. All right, this next question is from Thomas. He says, all right, utilizing the 3-bucket theory to retirement. For those of you that don't know, the 3-bucket theory is we think you ought to have 3 pots of money when you get to retirement. You want your pre-tax bucket, that's like your 401ks and your IRAs. You want your tax-free bucket, that's like your Roth IRAs or potentially your health savings account accounts. And then you want this third bucket, your after-tax bucket, your regular, just taxable brokerage account. He said, utilizing the 3-bucket theory to retirement, what is the percent breakdown of the third bucket's diversification as it relates to risk? I think this is the question he's asking. What types of investments should I hold in that third bucket? Like, how should I think about the risk of that specific pot relative to the risk of the whole portfolio, and I'm even going to add a little tag along here, does it change depending on where I am in my wealth cycle? Like
Yeah,
if I'm
you just picked on exactly what I was thinking about. Is first, you have to ask yourself, should I even go this deep with the planning if I haven't even built my base level of Army of Dollar Bills?
Yep.
So I would tell you, if your assets are not 500,000 or greater,
Yep.
you might be very well served by just doing an index target retirement fund in all three of the buckets. Now, look, that doesn't let you take advantage of all the planning opportunities of loss harvesting, charitable giving, and then tax location by the three pots. But sometimes the behavior of building wealth and getting to that critical mass is more important in the beginning than hyper focusing on all these little intricate planning details when it's just not time to get into that. Now, assuming this question was asked after they've built the critical mass size, I would say you're asking, this is a great question, but it's multiple things, because you got your pot strategy for how you're going to have liquidity in retirement, but then you've got tax location, which is an asset allocation design, and we've gone over this, and I can go through it really quick, but tax deferred is going to be all your ordinary income producing assets. It's going to be your fixed income and those type of things. Your tax free pot, which is your Roth IRAs, your Roth 401ks, your Roth 403bs. You want to put in all of your really potentially high growing stuff. Now, but there's a balancing act there. It doesn't mean that's where you're putting all your Reddit stocks.
Sure.
Because you don't get to take losses on what you lose.
And you can't get that money back in.
So you want to treat those assets with respect. You want to maximize growth, but not get too speculative with it. And then that last pot, the after tax, the brokerage accounts. Those are going to serve multiple needs. First of all, it's liquidity.
Yep.
So you're going to have cash is built into that, even though it might not be the most tax efficient. You just need a liquidity because that's the easiest pot to get a hold of. And then the second thing is think about dividends. Dividends have a better tax treatment.
Yep.
Capital gains have a good tax treatment. So those things are all positive. You're going to have a mix of those type of things, and you might, and now this is a little contrary, you might even have some additional conservative stuff because you want to have layers. You want to have your cash. You want to have any type of money that you might need in the next 5 to 7 years. Especially if you're well before 59 and a half. And then you want to have, some potentially dividend or capital gains assets.
Yeah, I think rules of thumb are really helpful there. In reality, though, it's very much a customized decision based on the size of your buckets. If your pre-tax or Roth bucket are way bigger than your after-tax bucket, it'll look one way. If the converse is true, it might look another way. And your age. If you're someone early on, it's likely that you might not have as many conservative asset-based assets inside that third bucket. But as you do get a little longer in the tooth, maybe you're like old, like 47, and you're somewhere in that, your after-tax bucket may have some of that conservative stuff in there. So it is very much specialized on your specific situation.
And if you go to Financial Order of Operations, once again, moneyguy.com/resources, we're really talking about here step number 7, which is hyperaccumulation, because it's not uncommon as you're running through all the free money from your employer, the tax-favored stuff with the Roth accounts. This is really something that's probably going to happen in your 30s, if not even your 40s. So don't get hyper-focused on this if you haven't run through the other steps.
Love it, love it, love it. All right, you want to answer an investments question?
Well, I know you get excited about
Yeah,
this.
that's why. Let's be honest.
So
because I'm in control. That's
read the question. I don't even mind if you go first,
All right,
since you're the CFA here.
This is from Scott. Scott says, what's your advice on investing in international stocks, both in terms of allocation and location? I've avoided allocating as highly as some of the target date funds, but valuations seem relatively cheap. And we get this question a lot, like how do I think about looking at domestic equity allocations versus international equity allocations? Well, first, I think you got to step back and look at the big picture. There are reasons to be excited about international investing. I mean, when you look at the rising middle class and other parts of the world and how technology is expanding and how the world is becoming a much smaller place and even how much revenue is derived from domestic companies, from international consumers, there's a lot of compelling reasons that you should be diversified internationally. Here's the truth of the matter, though, and this is a unique thing for two folks who help people design portfolios on a day-to-day basis. We don't know what the market's going to do.
Yeah.
We don't know what it's going to do over the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And specifically, we don't know what individual asset classes are going to do. And whenever we don't know something for sure, rather than taking the risk of being 100% wrong, we kind of like to stack the deck in probability so that we can be sort of mostly right or mostly wrong, but we're never going to be on either 100% either side. So we like to have a healthy international allocation. Now, you could be someone who says, man, I think that the international wave is going to be the future, so I'm going to hold 80% of my portfolio international. And you may be exactly right that that was a great place to be, but your timing could be off. You could say that, and international equities might not rise to true valuation, rise to realistic valuations for 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 years. So when you design your portfolio, before you can make the assessment of how much should I have in each, you got to look at your own personal situation. When do I need this money? What are the availability of accounts that I have? What are the availability of holdings that I have? Then you have to make a personal assessment on that. You know, he had mentioned that the target date funds have a lot of heavy international exposure. Well, a really easy thing to do is go look at what the target date funds are actually buying, go look at the underlying holdings, and kind of get a spreadsheet and do a little analysis yourself to see, okay, how is that international exposure being utilized and what are they doing? And how does that shift from a 2040 fund to a 2030 fund? Because you can glean some insight from that. I mean, it's not going to be perfect for your situation, but it will at least give you an idea of how to think about going about making that decision.
I think that is all perfect. I would also just throw in there the big picture because it ties into what you're saying is what's your why with the money. And then a good defense is definitely being proactive with the design of the portfolio on the front end. That's why I like, you have to kind of know what is your grounding philosophy towards investing. Mm-hmm. And I think there's nothing wrong with having a hub and spoke approach to investing or core satellite type approach.
Love it.
But you need to kind of know your why, know what you're trying to build for, and then that way, and know the context so that you can do it appropriately. And then that way you don't get pulled into chasing the hot dot or freaking out when the markets go down and we have volatility. I think that's why I try to tell people keep it simple. With the index target retirement funds, once you reach a critical mass, that complexity is going to come to you naturally, and you're going to realize you have enough assets there that you don't want to screw it up, and that's when I just know the game's rigged in a way that you're going to probably want a co-pilot.
Yep.
And look, that's the beauty of we've been doing this long enough that we can find out a person's age, what their risk profile, when they want to retire. And we can kind of try to help them navigate the complexity of what does that asset allocation look like.
Love it, love it, love it. Great question. It's awesome that you're thinking about these things. And I'm going to throw one other thing. Make sure you understand your individual risk tolerance and risk capacity, because not all international investments are created equal. Some developed markets behave very different than emerging markets. So understanding the difference and where you want to be allocated matters. There is one United States, one domestic thing that you have to look at. International, there's a bunch of countries, there's a bunch of different sectors, a bunch of different regions. So understand exactly what you're doing there. That's a great question. All right, this one, next question is from Conley. And Conley said, what is the reasoning for prioritizing step 6 in the financial order operations, that's maxing out retirement, over step 7, which is hyperaccumulation? For example, non-retirement investments. Why would I do step 6 max out before I do step 7 hyperaccumulation?
Well, it's really because there's a lot of tax benefits.
There it is.
It's both. I mean, in the fact that if you're in a high income situation, you're going to love the tax benefits that the retirement plan provides for you. If you're in a low income tax situation, you're going to still want to prioritize maxing out the retirement savings because the Roth opportunity, because think about it, guys, they put restrictions on how much money you can put into Roth accounts. If you're, IRA contributions, $6,000. If you're talking about employer plans, you're talking about $19,500.
Big difference.
So once you get to those levels, they don't let you put more into tax-free Roth accounts So that is a huge benefit. So I don't think you can move to worrying about hyper accumulation and the bucket strategy when you're leaving so much on the table, because realize if I could prioritize the different asset types and where I think the favorite children are, Roth is going to be the top. You know, as much as we don't like to talk about how much one child is doing something the other's not, Roth is pretty much an overachiever.
It is an overachiever.
Because
it's the golden child.
you get tax-free growth. If it's an IRA, you have access to the basis pretty easily. You don't have, on the IRAs, you don't have required minimum distributions. Guys, this is powerful stuff. And look, with rising potential for rising taxes in the coming years, I don't think you can neglect it. So that's why we've really tried to put a lot of thought in the financial order of operations. And I love it when we get questions challenging that, because we want to make sure you also have this knowledge so that you can maximize your growth potentials and pay attention to fees, pay attention to taxes, and get the best version of what your financial life should look like.
And remember, the financial order of operations is supposed to be a guideline. It's supposed to be guardrails to move you in the right direction. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to your unique circumstances, there are times where maybe you do have to make that shift. Maybe you do say, okay, well, I'm someone who's going to retire early, and I'm going to need access to my assets before 59 and a half or before 55. Maybe instead of maxing out retirement, I do need to call an audible and begin going to step 7, hyperaccumulation, begin building up that after tax. That's something unique and specialized to your situation. Let the FOO be your guide, but don't get so lost in it that it allows you to not be realistic about where you are personally, because ultimately that should be the driving factor behind your individual decisions.
I do think a lot of it's still built in, though, because even FIRE individuals, they're saving 40 to 50% of their income. And if you're saving 40 to 50% of your income, you're going to blow by step 6 into step 7 quite quickly. Just because, like I said, naturally it's going to happen, since the government's going to restrict you to $19,500 on your employer plan, $6,000 on the Roth. If you're saving 50% of your income, you're going to go through that very quickly, and it's there. But Bo's right. A lot of this stuff, we try to help the masses, but it's very individualized, and that's why we have the abundance cycle. We know complexity is coming for you the more success you have, and we'll be there to help out when that time comes.
Love it. All right, this next question is from Tim. And this is one, I'm going to assume that Tim is a young person. He says, do you recommend being completely debt-free before buying your first home? My wife and I have an auto loan and a student loan, no credit card debt or any other debts. So I have an auto loan on my thing to get me from A to B, and we have some student loan debt because we came out of school with that. Do we have to pay all of that off before we can go buy our first home, before we can begin to set roots?
Tim is new to the Money Guy show, I believe. I mean, you just can sense it, because if he'd hung out with us, he'd understand. And I feel like this is maybe the greatest hits day for the financial order of operations. But as we walk through, if you go to, once again, moneyguy.com/resources and download the financial order of operations, we try to give you the understanding of, some things are more powerful than even debt. Like your employer match, whether it's 50 cents on the dollar or dollar for dollar matching, that's either a 50% or 100% rate of return from those plans. That's pretty powerful stuff. So I'd be very sad if you're out there hyper-focusing on paying down debt and walking away from that 50 to 100% rate of return. And then there's other times where we try to give some flexibility on, that's why I think makes our channel so unique, like even car debt and even student loan debt. We have rules take into account risk, your stage of life, and how much potential your army of dollar bills have that lets you know what you should do. And I don't think we can cover all of that in a Q&A show, but we have covered it on our shows. And specifically, if you want to skip trying to go rake through our information and figure it out, it is covered, I know, in the deeper dive of financial order of operations as well.
I think the big answer that I would give you is no. You don't have to pay off all of your debts before you can go buy your first house, because obviously money is a tool that should allow you to do the things in life that you want to do. And I imagine one of those things might be my spouse and I owning a home and starting a family and doing those sorts of things. You want money to be your tool that allows you to do that. Well, you don't want to get so lost in the rules and regulations and guidelines that you don't take advantage of some of that you're not able to do some of those things. So assuming that your auto loan debt does fall into our metric, it is a 23.8 type purchase, and assuming that your student loan debt is not out of whack with exorbitant interest rates, yeah, I think it's okay if you guys plan to buy your first home. And you should go look at our shows, because you may be surprised to hear, if it's your first home, we don't think you have to come up with 20% down. There are some unique things you can do that will allow you to get into that home earlier. And there are even some things you can do to not have to pay PMI, to not have to pay, the mortgage insurance if you are below 20%. So don't let that be an inhibitor for you guys beginning to build your life foundation. Let the financial decisions you make go along with that journey, not fly in the face of that journey.
Tim, you're at the right place, though. I mean, I'm telling you, you keep watching our content or even go back and look at the archives, you're going to find a lot of the answers to these things, and I'm just welcome and excited you're curious, and I can't wait to help you navigate through building the abundance cycle and reaching that level of success.
Love it. All right, this next one is from Jonathan. He says, what is your best proven advice for how to break bad habits or discipline with debt to turn your life around? So maybe he or a friend or family member is having some problems with debt. What advice would you give them to let them on the straight and narrow? I've got some personal family experience with this I can share if you'd like, but I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, this is one I struggle with because I think we are very motivating. I think we're very optimistic. But I do know that we are financial mutants.
Yep.
And we attract financial mutants, meaning that we are kind of graduate level studies once you have some of the basics under control. And discipline, realize I put the cornerstone of what success is deferred gratification. And discipline and deferred gratification are siblings. They're definitely sharing blood. And so if somebody comes to us and they're struggling with just basic debt, I'm talking about credit cards and other things, I think that you have not graduated to the level of sophistication that we nail everything for you. You've got to get motivated and get serious. So I don't know if that's because this is where freezing credit cards, that doesn't appeal to me because I've never struggled with that decision. And I'm trying to give a good answer here, but also be realistic that I think somebody's got to get motivated. And I don't even mind throwing out some love to a neighbor.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
And that's what, Dave Ramsey and Ramsey Solutions, their thought on getting you out of debt, I have seen no one more effective than getting people excited. And I know you have an experience share that you could kind of talk about what you've seen in that aspect.
I have some family members who I told them over and over, hey, you got to get this credit card thing under control, and we'd work through some ways to get it paid off, and they'd be good for 6 or 8 months, and they get right back into it. Well, finally, their church was doing one of Dave's courses, and they kind of went through it and like, oh my gosh, you don't believe all this stuff that I'm learning. And they learned all these systems of how to handle it, and they were able to change. And I was like, I've been saying this stuff to you guys forever, but maybe I just wasn't saying the right way. In terms of like strategies, we talk all the time about how debt is like a chainsaw. Well, if you're using a chainsaw and you keep cutting yourself, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to I cut myself. You might be the kind of person that just can't use a chainsaw.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who's having trouble with credit cards, who keeps getting yourself in, you might be the ideal candidate to not use credit cards.
Yeah.
So what if you're missing out on the travel rewards? So what if you're missing out on the cash back? If you cannot pay it off on a month-to-month basis, you need to be a cash payer or maybe a debit card or something like that. Credit cards might not be your jam. Or when you go to the store and you go to buy furniture and they say, hey, if you open up a store credit card, we'll give you 20% off. You might want to say, you know what? I'll just pay 20% more because I know I can't handle that store credit card. It's going to get me in trouble. You may have to actually go cold turkey, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are systems out there, whether it be envelope systems or whatever the thing is, you have to understand where you are and be realistic about that. Just because your friends or your family or your colleagues can use debt in that way, if you can't do it well and you can't do it responsibly, it just might not be for you, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting that we can throw some love towards Dave, that he's great at getting people motivated. I do think it's interesting, and this is kind of the closing. Once you graduate where you get the debt under control, know that that's financial mutant status. And that's what I wish, because there are a whole nother group of people that don't struggle with the debt. And that's always where I was, is that I've never had the credit card issues. I'm just a naturally disciplined person. Would Ramsey be willing to admit that there are people within his tribe that also could be financial mutants, that they're not going to run afoul of the debt? And that's something I think that we'll see over time.
But I'll tell you what, listening to this show is a good start just to get your financial juices cooking. So if this is a question for you, you're in the right place, and we are happy to have you. All right, this next question, this is one that I've actually gotten a lot this year specifically. Actually, I got it more last year, but I've had some follow-ups. Rob said, I thought it said Rob Gronkowski. It does not say Gronkowski. That'd been awesome.
Well, I hear that he saves all of his endorsement money and just lives off his salary.
Awesome.
So he would definitely be a money guy, family type guy.
But this is not him. But your name is awful close. It says, with the rates at 0%, should I prioritize paying off $27,000 in student loans or focus on savings and investing in my IRAs? So he's at a place where his interest rates he's saying, you know what, if I'm not losing money to interest, should I tackle just knocking out that student loan debt, or would I be better served to build the army of dollar bills elsewhere?
I get nervous about answering this question because 2021, based off of what happened in 2020, is such a unique time. But I do want to share with you what a unique thing is. So if you're watching this post-September 2021, check back on some of our other content, because I don't know how this will age, but for the next 5 to 6 months, we have a unique thing going on, guys. They have told us that the government's essentially they're not even deferring interest. They're just not charging interest on a lot of these student loans until after we get through September, as part of the CARES relief and so forth. And then there's been a lot of throwing around in Washington that there might even be some forgiveness. And I would feel just horrible if I tell you, yeah, go knock that debt out, and then they write off $10,000. I've even heard as high as $50,000. So it's just a weird time, and this is what I get nervous about policy, is because, man, you can only plan for as good as what's going on with current legislation and what the current laws are. And right now we have a lot of question marks. I've had this problem with health insurance for years. I mean, for years you have all these policy debates. It's hard to tell early retirees or fire people, how do you navigate health insurance when there's so much policy debate and things are just so uncertain? We kind of have that going on right now with student loans. So I would tell you, my advice now in this unique time at the end of March of 2021, all the way through to September, you kind of just need to keep focusing good behavior of building resources, but I don't know that I'm throwing them into my student loan right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you, but I'm gonna say it a little bit differently. Because look, I like math. Math is just kind of my thing, right? Well, based on present day, we kind of have some student loan rule of thumbs, right? Given what we know the historical risk premium to be. And that's just a way of saying, what can my army of dollar bills do versus what am I paying in my student loan interest? And it's pretty simple mathematics right now. Our rule of thumb,
I know where you're going now.
Our rule of thumb is that if you're in your 20s and your student loan interest is 6% or below, I don't know that I'd be in a huge hurry to go pay that off.
And what's the rate between now and September right now, Bo?
Zero. Zero.
It's a pretty easy hurdle to clear.
6%. And so if you're in your 30s, we say, okay, if your student loan interest is below 5%, I don't know that I'd be in a huge hurry to pay it off. And then in your 40s, if it's below 4%, I don't know that I'd be in a huge hurry to pay it off, because odds are the return on your army of dollar bills is going to be so much stronger than what you're paying on your student loan interest. And in a time when you're paying zero on your student loan interest, the mathematics are just, it's easy, in my opinion, to think about it that way. So that's how I would approach it. Based on your age, do I think that the money that I can deploy elsewhere will have a greater rate of return than 0%? And that's kind of the way that I would approach making that decision.
By the way, that fits in nicely to the financial order of operations, because, look, number 3 is high interest debt. 0 is definitely, because I know we have a picture of a house on step 9, which is the low interest debt. Student loan interest at 0% is definitely low interest debt, so plan accordingly.
This next question is from Tosborn. This is what Tosborn said. I just inherited a brokerage account in my name only, so I'm assuming from a family member. If I keep it in my name only and name my wife as the beneficiary, she'll get a full step up in basis rather than just 50%. Is that a good strategy? He kind of asked like two separate.
Yeah, there's all kind of moving parts
some
in
overlap
that question. First of all, if this is a brokerage account that was inherited, you can always add a payable on death or a transfer on death, a TOD, but it's not a beneficiary. Beneficiaries
Yep.
are on retirement accounts. So that's one thing that's in there that I just want to kind of nerd out. But the other thing, here's the bigger part, is in that first part of the question. I inherited this money. You guys should recognize whenever I hear about inherited money, that is special money, meaning that it is legally protected if it's kept separate from creditors, from divorces. There's all kind of legal protections from inherited assets. So that's what, even if my wife inherited a big pot of money and we split we have joint accounts here and there.
Sure.
I would recommend her setting up that inherited account as an individual account, just because of that favored legislation or laws to protect that money. So that's the first thing, is that because I love joint assets, but I think that you also have to pay attention to the laws and creditors, lawsuit potentials, and other things, and don't throw away that legal protection so easily.
Now, what I always hear people say, when I say, hey, inherited assets, you ought to keep them separate. And I'm like, oh, well, I just feel like that's showing that we don't have a lot of faith in our marriage because, we want to bring everything together because we're going to be together forever. And the response I always give is, if your spouse has an account that's in their individual name and you're together forever, then it all worked. Everything worked out exactly the way that was supposed to. So I think that's sort of a straw man argument.
Well, yeah, I'm all for us building assets together, and I think it's especially when marriages come together. But that's a unique account, an inherited account. And then, answering the second part of the question is, yes, when you pass away with an individual account, any appreciation, there would be under current law a step up in basis, where if it was owned in either joint tenants with rights of survivorship or tenants in common, you'd only get a partial step up in basis. But that's not really where I think the meat of the question.
Yep.
I would focus on this are inherited assets, so there's some favored legal status there, and protecting those assets, and then hopefully that kind of checks the boxes.
Yep. Love it. This next question is from Silent Strife. Sorry about that.
Is that passive aggressive?
I
Is
don't
that just
know.
another
Yeah,
way of saying
that's-
passive aggressive?
I guess. Hey, at the Money Guy Show, my job provides life insurance for up to $250,000, but our household is a $250,000 per year in a high cost of living area. So I think you're saying we have income of $250,000, and my employer provides $250,000 of life insurance. Do I need supplemental insurance? Do I need more insurance than that? I'm in my late 30s. So it sounds like I make $250,000, high cost of living area. My employer offers me one time salary, one time's income, and I'm in a high cost of living. I'm in my 30s. Do I need more insurance than that?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this question. I want to give a compliment to your employer, because realize your employer can do $50,000 worth of life insurance for you, take full deduction. Anything they do above that $50,000, they really like you, because the government kind of takes away some of the benefit of the employer giving it to you. So they really like you to give you up to $250,000. But realize, when we give guidelines on insurance, and this isn't just ours, I hear Dave Ramsey give this guidance and so forth, is that you take your income, you multiply it by 10, and then now I'm going to add a little bit extra. I think especially if you live in a high cost of living area, add any outstanding mortgage debt on top of that too, because that's probably going to be a big pile of money. So if you put those two together, you'll have a much better understanding of what your risks are. So that's the guidance. It's not one time's income, because one time's income, especially if you're young and you have young children in the house, that could be scary.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, that's just because that's probably not going to wipe out the mortgage. That's also not going to help your spouse, as their world's already going to be really difficult and struggling. You want to make sure there's plenty of liquidity and access to resources. So I would go beyond that one times. I would look at the 10 times. And then if you're really, if you're in a situation, this might be a financial planner type thing to really hone in and customize. But if your life's pretty simple, you can use some of these benchmarks and guidelines.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is this person said they're in their late 30s. I might say, okay, well, I make $250,000. Well, times 10, that's 250,
times
2.5 million, and then plus another $500,000. That's oh my goodness, $3 million of life insurance. Is that really what I need? Here's the good news. If you're someone who's buying term insurance and you're someone in your late 30s, there's a good chance that it's going to be relatively inexpensive for the amount of coverage that you have. Now, one of the strategies you can do is, yeah, you may have an insurable need right now of $3 million, but 20 years from now, it might not still be $3 million. So you could actually look at staggering your policies. Maybe I want one policy that's 10 years that covers this much, and then another policy that's 20 years that covers this much, and then maybe I want a 30-year policy that covers this much. There are creative ways to solve that problem in a really cost-effective manner, but you kind of got to think through it. Whenever I sit down with couples, I always say, hey, hey, spouse one, if spouse two were to pass away, how much money would you need to be okay? And that's like a really weird question to ask. But that's really what you're saying is if I were not here to provide for my wife, how much income would we need to replace since I could no longer go out and earn that and do that so that she could pick up the pieces and continue raising our girls and continue doing all the things? That's really the conversation to have. And in most situations, one time's income probably won't get that done. Now, there is a caveat. Let's say that you're someone who's been building wealth and you're getting close to financial independence, and you say, you know what, if I got taken out by a bus tomorrow, we've got a big enough portfolio that my spouse and my family will be taken care of. You may no longer have an insurable need. I think a lot of clients find it really interesting when we tell them, hey, yeah, your insurance is coming up for renewal, but you've reached financial independence. You don't have to have life insurance anymore. Just because you're still living doesn't mean you have to have that if that money's not needed to protect those that depend on you. So it depends on your life cycle.
I do want to give one caveat to that because
Sure.
I have this conversation all the time. A lot of you guys might have 20-year or 30-year term insurance. And yes, you've reached financial independence because you're great financial mutants. You've been saving. But realize that policy, especially as you get into your 50s and 60s, if you're only paying a few $100s a month because you bought that policy when you were in your 40s and you were much cheaper to insure, don't just throw it away.
Yep.
I mean, I tell this, and it's kind of, it's just the cost of what the premium to what the level of insurance you're getting is so powerful. I don't want you just throwing those policies away just because you've reached financial independence. You need to do a value analysis to say, look, this policy premium is $300 a year. I'm getting
This benefit,
$750,000 worth of coverage. It might be worth for the next 5 years, because that's when the term expires, just to pay $300 a year just in case. I want to throw that caveat because I don't want people to say, ding, ding, ding,
Oh, I need
I've
to go
reached
cancel,
financial
yeah.
independence. Let's go cancel this term policy. There might be a situation where you're paying way less than the actual value of that policy just because you bought that policy 20 years ago.
Yep, love it. All right, this one is from Don. Don says, I'm building a new home and have the money to pay cash to build it. First of all, applause on that. That's a fantastic place to be. However, with current mortgage rates being so low, what are your thoughts on keeping my money invested? And he said in parentheses, return about 7%, and getting a mortgage at 2 to 3%. I love it when folks ask questions and put the numbers in there for us, right? He's saying I can keep it invested, make 7%, or I can take a mortgage out and do the 2 to 3%. What are some things that Don ought to be thinking about that might change what the advice is?
Well, here's what's missing, though, in this analysis. I don't know his age.
Yep.
I don't know what he's got in outside assets for retirement, because this is very customized type territory here. Because the thing is that if this person is 33 years of age, because that's the average age of a person buys their first home in the United States, and they have 100% cash, I'm probably telling a 33-year-old, you sure that's the best use of your money? When I'll put down 20%, let the other 80%, because you've got 20, 30 years till you reach retirement. Let that compounding growth work. But if Don is somebody who's 58 years of age, and he's got a big pot of cash reserves, he's got a big pot of retirement assets, and he's been saving and has this liquidity for this house that he's retiring in, I kind of like the idea of that person being debt-free and dialing down their risk profile as they walk through that threshold of retirement. So it is very customized to where you are in your life journey. I don't know if I gave enough color to it.
I thought that was
but that's-
beautiful because most folks, again, this is my bent where I sometimes think too quickly before actually thinking. Is I'd say, oh, I can make 7% and I can pay 3%. There's an arbitrage situation there. I think you're exactly right, though. For someone who is later on in life, has substantial assets, this money will not diminish their ability to stay financially independent. They have to ask the question, what's my ultimate why? Money is only a tool to allow us to do the things in life we want to do. Well, if one of the things that Don wants is to be debt-free and to have financial independence and to do what he does, what he wants to do, when he wants to do it, the way that he wants to do it, and paying cash for the home will still allow him to do all those things, then I think it's great. So what if he could optimize those dollars? If his goal is not to optimize and just grow it as big as possible, and he'd rather have less stress and de-risk and take some of that off the table, I think that sounds excellent. But it is very much a customized situation based on two specific risk factors. One, his risk tolerance. Two, his risk capacity. And then the third, which isn't really risk, is what are his ultimate goals? Yeah. What's he trying to accomplish with the army of dollar bills that he has either built or is building? Guys, thank you so much for letting us answer these questions. We love, love, love getting to do this. If you've not gone to our website, go check out moneyguide.com. You can go to moneyguide.com/resources. Check out our resource page. We're actually building some presently, so we'll be adding some more to it in the very, very near future. If you just want to know more about us, you can go dive on the website. You can go check out aboundwealth.com. We just appreciate you letting us be a part of your financial journey and helping you take your finances to the next level.
Money Guy team, out.